Here we have our brand new, barely broken in ETM RTR Lite. So naturally the first thing on the menu, tear it to pieces. There's a few reasons why I want to do this, and first of all being, I want to see what I have. Electro Co themselves saved a lot of time, thought, and effort went into the design of this thing, so why not take a look at that up close and personal. First things first, before we go tearing into this, let's take out the battery, and thankfully this is really easy because there's no tools required. All you gotta do is find this little loop on the bottom left side next to the shock, you pull that, and the seat pops off. Underneath, we see the top of the battery held in place with this bar and a thumb screw. You simply unscrew, pull out the bar, unplug the battery leads, and out comes the battery. I really like that. Now to start with the actual teardown, I'm going to start with the front and work my way back. So here I have the front axle, brakes, and forks. Now I'm not just doing this to see how the fudge is packed, of course. I have other motives. First reason is that if I'm going to build this thing up, I need to know how everything is put together and assembled currently so I know what to work with. If you haven't seen the first video about this bike, I'll link it at the end of the video, but in that I announced my series idea for this bike. That being essentially that I'm going to take this RTR Lite and turn it into an RTR not light, full strength, unrated, the regular RTR. But with a catch, not only are we going to be avoiding Electro Co's website for upgrade parts, but I want to get this done to the point where it's at least comparable to an RTR for less than the price of an RTR. That means we have a budget of just under $1,000. Can it be done? We'll see. So all the more reason to pull this thing apart so I know exactly what kind of things I can get for this so that it's compatible. Stuff like measurements and sizing and spacing, all of that needs to be figured out before I actually go throwing money and parts into this. So I need to make sure it actually is going to work. The other thing I want to do with this is see what the parts compatibility is like, because as you may know, I have a couple of Mototechs on hand, and I think it'd be really cool to see what kind of ETM components I can put onto that, because a lot of the components on Mototechs are very cheap. I mean, they're very cheap electric dirt bikes, especially compared to this one. So if I can be able to pull old parts off of this onto a Mototech, it's like an OEM Plus upgrade, except it's across multiple lines. I do this all the time with all of my bikes. Like this rear shock on the 60 volt, it's from my Honda Grom. This exhaust, it's from the CRF 450 RL's faster and more powerful brother, the CRF 450X. One man's trash is another man's parts upgrade. So we got the Mototech wheel over here for the first check, which is that front brake system. I actually thought this would be a pretty good idea picking one of these up even before I considered getting the ETM myself, because these are actual legitimate motorcycle brakes and they're pretty beefy, especially compared to the dinky little mountain bike brakes that this thing comes with. So I'm just gonna take off the caliper on the Mototech and then line things up generally just to see how things would work, if they could work anyway. Oh, right off the bat, before we check anything, there's a lot of slack in the line, but not a huge deal if it works. Just look at the size difference right here from the Mototech versus the ENC, and this is even an aftermarket one. This is a 4-piston caliper that I put on a while ago as an upgrade to the original Mototech ones, and even that is just nothing compared to this chunker right here. But if we move the Mototech caliper out of the way and see if things line up, let's see whether or not it works. Well, first thing right off the bat, even using the caliper bracket from the ENC kit, I can tell that this is too thick. It's actually not even going up behind this thing, and taking a look at the bolt holes here versus the bolt holes here, I think it's... Actually, it might work. Another thing I'm noticing here with the brackets, this one right here against this one right here, is that they are definitely at different lengths. So this one is a lot closer to the rotor than this one, and I think that's because the rotor is smaller, but either way, this is not going to be a plug and play option. You might have to swap some brackets between the two and do some fiddling and shaving and cutting and all sorts of things, but this could actually work for someone. Next, moving up on the front end with the forks here, and right off the bat, I can tell that the forks for the ETM is not going to work with the forks for the Mototech. Even just on a visual basis right here, you can see that this is a lot thicker than that. But what if you're talking about not just the forks, but the triple clamps as well? Is that compatible? Well, we might be running into some good news because I just took off the top clamp of the RTR Lite, and I have another one from the Mototech that was laying around. This one was broken in the packaging when I got it originally, but this part and this part is the exact same size. So it looks like you would be able to line these things up on a Mototech and possibly even get the whole front end of an RTR, the clamps, the forks, the front wheel, everything. So that would be really cool to see if you wanted to do that, I guess. Now I'm gonna keep going with this, not Not that I really need to pull off the bottom and the whole triple tree assembly, but I'm actually curious to see on the inside how well things are made. I assume that these are made really, really well, and their price kind of justifies that. But I want to pull this thing out anyway and see whether or not things need to be greased on the inside, if I need to add anything or pack those bearings. By the way, PSA, if you have a Mototech in particular, always do this, even if it's brand new, because I pulled that apart on my 60-volt Mototech and there was barely any grease in that thing at all. I had to repack the entire bearing. It's got a decent amount of grease in there, but you know, could always add a little bit more. Switching gears now to the rear, I'm gonna take that axle out and the wheel off so I can see a little bit better at least how the swing arm is made. Well, we got the rear disassembled fully, or at least kind of. I'm gonna keep the motor in the swing arm for now. I don't really think I need to pull it out at this point, but I got the shock out of here, and this is probably a pretty good upgrade for a Mototech or any other kind of bike that you have, because this alone, even though this is not the adjustable version like the regular RTR has, this is actually pretty stiff, and I really like the spring rate on it with me and my weight compared to the Mototech spring, which really barely holds its own weight. Taking a look at it though, you can see that the RTR is a lot longer. That makes sense. This is slightly larger, so you could put this on a Mototech. It would just give you that stink bug look. A lot of people have that anyway, so it doesn't seem like it matters to most people, but for me, I would probably try to find something a little bit shorter. And as far as bolt holes go, it's gonna line up just fine. This is the bolt from the RTR, and it fits in there perfectly. Maybe I should stick the Mototech shock in there and slam this thing. No one in their right mind would do that. Now onto the body itself, and one of the easier parts of this, taking off all the plastics so we can see the frame underneath. In fact, it's so easy, I think I can get it all done with just one 4mm hex key. Yep, one screw, that's all it takes. And a lot of unscrewing. Well, now we can really take a look at this frame, and what a frame it is. I said this in my first ride, but I really like the solid feel of it, and now that everything is stripped away, you can really see how well it's made. In fact, it even has different aspects and characteristics like you would see with a normal dirt bike, like this removable swing arm. So you can really tell that they took a lot of inspiration from the big gas-powered bikes and performance bikes that we've seen for years, rather than taking whatever box tubes were available and slapping them together like the Mototechs and other Chinese bikes are made. Now we can take a really good look at what's left and the most important components, which are the electronics, the controller, and all of the wiring. So this gives you a good idea of how things are routed from the motor right here in the swing arm. It goes down and up through the frame along the side here up to the top, and then behind this plastic panel, which we'll remove really quickly here, is the controller itself. I like how a lot of the internal plastics are really just snap-on. They just have a little C-clamp thing that just snaps in around the frame on the tubes here. And one of the things here that I have is the battery tray, which I just pulled out. And one of the things that people have started to note, which some say that it's not a problem, some say it is a problem, but that the plastics on the battery tray here are just a little bit sharp from the manufacturing process, and the phase wires and the hall sensor wires right here that are in orange rub up against that, and a few people have seen with some mileage that it starts to cut into this. I know this is just a protective layer, but I want to make sure that the protective layer is there to protect it. So while this is out, I'm going to sand this off, file it down just a little bit so it's actually smooth, and that way there's no risk of it actually damaging the wiring. Now for the heart of this thing, and the part that I'm most excited about and what really matters, the controller and the wiring. Hello. Now we can see the beating heart of this thing, and it is a Votol, or Votol. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce any of these things really, but it's a VOTOL EM50-4. In fact, this looks pretty familiar. Hang on a second. Yep, it's what I suspected. This controller from the RTR is the exact same as this controller from the original ETM kit. How funny is that? I mean, one's got silver fins, the other's got black fins, but they're both EM50-4s. And actually that brings up an interesting point with this particular RTR Lite, because I have seen a lot of videos on YouTube with the RTR, and I think it was Outdoor Pat's video with his RTR, which I presume is the original RTR, and that one had a Votol EM85 in it. So there's definitely a difference in controllers there, and it makes me wonder whether or not I could take the original RTR's controller and swap it into this one for an OEM Plus upgrade. Well, I think it's safe to say that this frame now is sufficiently torn down. There's very little left to go, and I'm not really gonna go any further, I don't think. But now for a very important check to make sure that this will work with any kind of build potential that I have here, I'm gonna take this innocuous little green box and just kind of feel out the place a little bit and see where this could go, or maybe another one, who knows. Oh ho ho ho, there is potential here. Yeah, nope. Oh yeah. Oh, not quite. Well, that was fun. We learned a lot. I got to see how really well built this thing truly is, and I also discovered that there's a lot of parts to this thing. But I think it was all worthwhile because it gives you the opportunity to see this bike inside and out, and it helps me with my build in that I have to find some pretty unorthodox parts for this thing, and now I have a better idea of where it's all gonna fit. Now I gotta put it back together.
You remember where everything goes. Maybe a much shorter series, if not, I suppose. But now we know. Now we know. Now we know how the RTR fudge is packed.